So,
Hello.
hi, Dr. Rob. It's great to see ya.
You know, Tammy, I have to say that of all the people in my life, you are the happiest to see me than anyone else. And I mean, in my marriage, work, you're always like, so like, hey, Dr. Rob, we're
I
glad
know,
you're here.
I do. Like, oh, there's Dr. Rob. Yes. So yes, I do have enthusiasm. So,
I
okay.
appreciate that.
So if you would go to the answered questions and you'll see the one at 502 from anonymous attendee. It says, my partner has been told by his CSAT that he is not an addict, just a compulsive behavior. Vanilla porn on and off his whole life. He's 65, secretive with me for 18 years. He doesn't relate to others in the group who have more severe addictions, according to him. How does the compulsive versus addictive affect recovery?
I'm not sure exactly what that last question means. I mean, I can talk about compulsive
Well,
behavior.
so according to this partner, and here's I'm gonna say this right off the bat. What I'm hearing is your partner that's seeing your let's I'm gonna use addict. Your addict partner is going to a CSAT. Your addict partner is coming home and saying, my CSAT is saying.
Right.
So that's my first always massive red flag of like, is that really happening
Right.
again? Going in and getting collaborative information. Um, and
Mm.
so Dr. Rob, I'd like you to address vanilla porn. I like we talk about
Well,
porn being an issue. So so that's interesting. But it's like I go to my these group meetings and I don't relate to anything because I'm not as bad as them. How often do we hear that, that I'm not as bad as that person? So rather than looking for where they can connect, it's like, no, I'm not as bad as that person. But I also don't hear from this betrayed partner that he stopped the vanilla porn behavior. So thoughts?
Well, first of all, I have to say I did an amazingly wonderful podcast. And if you guys are not aware of the podcast, I just want to say that it's an opportunity for you folks to hear so many experts talk to me about human sexuality and intimacy. We had this whole discussion. Sorry, I want to answer a question, but Dr. Erica Schwartz and I talked about what is intimacy, what is sexuality, what is healthy, what is not. And we were talking about this very same question in a particular, thanks for putting that up, Terry, because I got to tell you, more than anyone, more than any situation, people say, I heard the podcast and then I want to play it for my spouse. And this is something you could do in your car, you could do, and I'm not trying to promote, I am promoting, but I'm promoting for your healing. In any case, one of the things we talked about today is really what is addiction? What is the person who has a lot of sex or does whatever they do? And what is versus versus someone who's truly addicted. And the way I have always looked at it is the same as way as you might look at alcohol or gambling or any other addiction, which is, I do not think addiction is qualified by how often I have sex. People have different libidos. People are in different places. That's fine. Sex addiction is not qualified by what kind of sex I have, because some people like this kind of sex and some people like. So if it isn't qualified by how much or what kind, what really qualifies sex addiction or all addictions? And what we agreed on, and I absolutely think, is it's about the functionality of your life. For one thing, is this interfering with your family life? Is this interfering with the intimacy, the connection with your partner? Is this leaving you emotionally unavailable or sexually unavailable? And one of the things that we talked about was, again, the consequences on your life. The other thing, though, is about a whole bunch of things about addiction is about lying. Addiction about keeping secrets. And it was an interesting conversation time with Dr. Schwartz today because she's very aware of healthy sexuality and sexuality from a physician's point of view, from a hormonal point of view, and from a cultural point of view. And she will say that, if someone wants to have sex with another partner, fine. If they want to have sex, with a sex worker, fine. But you don't get to lie about it. And I think that really crosses. Now, I'm not saying that. I mean, look, here's the thing about a relationship. If I go, well, let me back up. I used to say to all my clients, they'd come to me, well, porn is the problem, but it's not seeing sex workers, or sex workers aren't the problem. It's the affair. And I would say to them, look, I don't care what you do, but first you got to run it by your spouse. That morning, you have to say, gee, honey, is it okay with me if I do this? And if you do this, unlikely you're an addict. Very unlikely an alcoholic's going to come and say, honey, I'm going to drink myself under the table and then drive while drinking. Do you think that's okay? It's really the same thing. And it's so deeply about honesty and connection. What Tammy was talking about, well, just one very basic thing. There is a program called Porn Addicts Anonymous. I'm not sure Tammy mentioned this, but if someone doesn't, I suggest people try all kinds of meetings. It's online. How great is that? You can go to Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous, Sex Addicts Anonymous. So there are so many resources where, and I have worked with people who don't feel comfortable here, that they feel more comfortable there. That's fine. No harm, no foul. You're exploring things. I like some restaurants, you don't. And in that way, in a simple way, it's true. But when people say stuff like, they're not as sick as I am, I'm not as sick as they are, this is what I hear is, I'm looking for the person who I least identify with in the room. So then I can say, oh, I'm not like those people. People don't go to 12-step meetings necessarily in the beginning and say, I want to see who's like me and who struggles like I do, because they don't want to be there. So if they look at the person as the worst of the worst, they can say, oh, well, I'm not as sick as that person. We don't define addiction by, it's defined by how you were living your life with your partner. So if I'm seeing sex workers and you're looking at porn, what difference does it make if I'm betraying or lying to my spouse? So um, I, I, I am concerned about the defending. I'm concerned about, and there's other people, other things. I mean, this is such a good piece because lying for 18 years is, I don't know if you want to call it addiction or not, but the destructiveness in your relationship, the lack of empathy and compassion. Look, if I'm hurting you with something, or I find out that I'm hurting you with something, I'm going to address it. That's what loving partners do. I'm going to say, gee, I'd rather do this, but it's hurting you and it's hurting us, so I'm not going to do it. Or I'm going to find, this is someone who says, well, I don't really care how it's affected you for 18 years because I don't want to call it a problem. The problem is you're suffering with 18 years of lying and cheating. And why doesn't the person you love look at it, regardless of how much or where, and say, I've caused you pain with that. I don't want you to be in pain. I love you. I will address it. So to me, that is the most painful part, is you run into someone and say, it hurts me. I want to be with you. Why don't you work it? And the person says, I don't care. It's not as much of a problem as you think it is. I can't think of a way to dismiss a relationship more profoundly than loving someone who's hurting and you are hurting them. And you say, well, too bad. I'm doing what I like to do. So, and I will say, as Tammy does always, what kind of support are you getting? Are you in a partners group where, we don't charge for those, a betrayed partners group? I think it's really important to hear what other spouses have to say, because you're not the only one who has this story. And, I can speak to you as an expert, but I think hearing what other people are going through is incredibly valuable. And I will say to you, you may not want to go there. You may say, oh, well, my spouse is not as bad as that spouse. It doesn't matter. Trust me, you have a place there. I know I'm going on and on, but I want to say one more thing, which is one of the things that Dr. Schwartz and I were talking about is issues that happened to her life and issues that have happened in mine. And we were both saying, oh, I can't believe you went through that. How painful. That's nothing like what I went through. Pain is pain. It doesn't matter whether you're hurting about this and I'm hurting about that. Pain is pain. And you don't get to qualify and say, well, I'm not hurting as much as the person who's having an affair. You are hurting regardless. And how could it be that the person who says they love you does not care about the fact that they're hurting you? There you go.
Great job. Thank you.
Thanks, Tammy.
Okay, so now scroll down to 506 and answer.
Got that.
Okay, can you explain the major differences between sex addiction treatment recovery and drug addiction treatment recovery, other than NA is considered a program of complete abstinence from substances, and SA is abstinent from obsessive compulsive destructive behaviors? I'm asking because NA seems to have so much more literature and study material than I found in SA. Oh, wait, go back to all the stuff I put in the chat. I mean, there are more S group 12-step programs than, so check out all of those resources. I put a link to the 12-step groups that are applicable to this. NA's on there as well. But so that's the housekeeping. So please, let's discuss the difference between, sobriety and recovery and substances.
Well,
and
for one thing, just the address, NA has been around for 50 years. maybe 45 years. Cocaine, remember that, Tammy?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm trying to
So
think of, I don't remember
the
the
history is
timeline. Yeah.
much longer, and the harm is much more obvious. If I'm sticking needles in my arm and I am passing on the floor, the degree to which the harm is obvious to the outsider makes it, I think, more compelling for that person to be engaged in that place. I wanted to address, and by the way, I think that so abstinence in drugs, alcohol, very simple. I don't use again. I can survive without using. I can actually enjoy my life. But if someone has an eating disorder, I don't want them to stop eating. And if you have a sexual disorder, I don't want you to stop being sexual. What I want is for you to do it in a way that's healthy and honest with yourself and your partner. So we'll literally take a piece of paper and say, what kinds of sexual behavior enhance your life and the people around you, and what kinds of sexual behavior are harmful and secretive. And in that way, it isn't about, again, how compulsive, how much. It's about you have to stop doing the things that are destroying your life. And sex is incredibly enhancing and a wonderful thing, but not if you're doing it in a way that is hurting yourself and others. And so in that way, it can never be complete abstinence, but there has to be clarity. And by the way, not from the person who's doing it, like, well, I want to change this and I want to change that. This is where you really need a professional to support you. This is what we spend a lot of time on residential treatment. And certainly even in 12-step program and sponsors, what is sobriety, how I define it. And it may change because I might be a single person. And so what I define as sobriety is going to be very different than what I define if I'm a married person, may very well be. So the bottom line, I think, about all of this is there isn't a lot of difference in the treatment process. We're confronting distortions. We're confronting denial. We're giving people a different way of living. We're tying it back to their trauma and issues that might have caused it or left them doing it. That's true in all the addictions. But I'll tell you this, and I'll just say it this way, and Tammy knows this. Years and years ago, I was traveling, and sometimes you just need to go to a meeting. Sometimes you just need to go to a 12-step meeting. And I went in and I raised my hand, are you an addict? Yes, I'm an addict. And people were talking about whatever they were talking about. And I raised my hand and I said, I'm really struggling with masturbation or whatever it was. Well, I got to tell you, that room got really quiet because in order to heal, you have to be around people who have the same issue. Betrayed partners heal best with betrayed partners. Sex addicts, and I'll say this about treatment centers. I've created a whole bunch of them, and I have to say, I have never done better work. And I just really love the work we do. But if you go on a website and you see, we treat alcoholism, we treat eating disorders, and then when you ask, well, what is it? And they say, well, we put all of our addicts in the same group and they all talk about their addictions. The sex addict is never going to say anything because they know in their mind they're the pervert. They're the person that everyone's going to look at. So unless people are really surrounding themselves with people with the same issue, and that's why I mentioned porn addiction, because if I'm out having sex with 300 people, as a porn addict, I might look at those people and say, well, I'm not doing that. I wish I was having more sex. So there are reasons why programs are different. There's a reason why there's an NA, a CA, an MA, an AA. It isn't just that we are so sort of narcissistic, everyone has to have their own specific program. It's that the way you live when you're in addiction, depending on the addiction, is different. And you need to be with your own people. I'm very concerned about this because I want someone to say, I want to look at what my problems are and I want to understand them better. And maybe these are people as uncomfortable as I am that I can learn something from. And so looking for where I don't fit in rather than where I do fit in really does concern me about your spouse.
So, I want to just tag on a couple of things. First of all, we have a free drop-in group for people with co-occurring, this is for men with co-occurring sex, porn, and whatever substance, whether it's alcohol, stimulants, whatever. So that's on Tuesday nights, and Dr. David Fawcett hosts that group. So it's a free group drop-in. It's the one place you can talk about all of those things, in one meeting. So that's one thing. The other thing is, we both have been doing this a while. We can't tell you how many people have gone to treatment programs for substances, and no one asked them about any of this other stuff. And the goal is absolutely stop using substances, you know, and that's one of my addictions. That's not the only one, but yes, you know, so yes, being abstinent from substances is sobriety. And what I have learned on my journey and really appreciate with seeking integrity is that's not the whole thing. You know, like we'll be miserable, we won't be happy, joyous, and free, and we'll also be using something else. And we get lots of people who have been through multiple substance programs and then finally figure out that, oh, the sex and porn addiction are really a, you know, if not the primary, a major component, and nobody was asking. And that's what we do at Seeking Integrity. We're looking across everything, and whether it's food or gaming or gambling or whatever it is, because those have to be addressed, because the acting out is a symptom. The underlying issues are, you know, why we're using maladaptive coping mechanisms. We're using external things to try to make us okay. It never works, but we sure try everything in order to continue on that path. So, yeah, doing the piecemeal, you know, yes, and go, like, I think it's great. Go to NA, go to S groups, yes, all of those things. But having a place, you know, a sponsor that understands all, or our Tuesday night group where you can talk about everything is really key to this. So, okay, go ahead.
Yeah, there's something else in that I wanted to say. I wrote it down. One of the things, and Tammy said we've been doing this a while. Trust me, I had hair when I started this work for myself, and then, but in any case, we do that work. We are a place that looks at both sex and drugs, because I understand, unlike the people that Tammy was talking about, is if you go into a drug and alcohol center and no one asks you about sex, then they'd understand that your drinking is tied to the people you're having sex with, or my drugs are because I go to the sex workers and they have the drugs, and that's how I can't stay sober. Or, you know, I meet them in the casino in Vegas and I end up gambling. So you have to look at the pieces and how they correlate. And as Tammy said, well, I'll just say this: therapists aren't trained to talk about sex, no less know how. And I think that obviously it creates a lot of problems. There's many reasons about that. But if you're a drug and alcohol counselor and you do not ask about the sexual behavior, then it's not unlikely that person's going to relapse. And so one of the reasons that I have taken this on and feel very strongly about it is that these two issues do need to be looked at as what Tammy would call a co-occurring disorder. And I love when Tammy says this. She says it's like,
you just turned yourself off. You muted yourself when you did your AirPod.
That was recovery. I had to turn myself off, but that was funny, right?
It was.
Maybe to
smiling.
me, not to anyone
I'm
else.
smiling.
But, thank you. But it is very important to Tammy and I to understand and to convey to you that you hit this. You know, addiction is not about the behavior; it's about the function that it serves. That allows me to escape. That allows me to disappear. That allows me to separate from the people I love. And I am particularly invested and love doing the work when people do have co-occurring disorders, because they are going to talk about it. But sex is, as Dr. Carnes would say, sexual problems cause us the most shame, and yet they're the ones that we are least likely to talk about. And I always like that he said that, because it's so true. Anyway, we got lots of questions.
Well, I'm going to just tag on to that. And therapists don't talk about sex and money. Like, those are the two things. And how many clients are spending money, you know, OnlyFans, sex workers, you know, whatever, they're spending a lot of money. And the two things that therapists don't talk about are sex and money with their clients, because it's uncomfortable. So anyway, that was just so go to the very bottom one in the answer now. I'm the betrayed partner.
616.
No, 508 in the answer.
So I have 511. Oh, sorry, answered. My apologies. Okay,
Yeah,
oops.
stay in the answer. I'm going to keep putting them in there. Okay.
Right. No, I got that.
Welcome
So
to
508. Okay.
I am the betrayed partner. D-Day was 20 months ago.
Right.
I am the issue now in the marriage. I am stuck in the rage phase over my husband's acting out before D-Day. He has been sober in recovery since D-Day, as far as I can tell, and according to him. I can't imagine ever being able to put all this behind me. What can I do now to either heal or leave the relationship?
You know, Tammy, I really want you to speak to this. I can knock a few things, but Tammy has, well, she's a leader in this part of the word. Pardon me. So Tammy, would you talk about this?
I will, and I put one resource. So I get it, and there, I promise you, there is healing, whether you stay or go. And honestly, I'm going to find. I put the Empowered Women's Retreat, a link in the chat. Please consider that. I mean, you're in a horrible place. You're feeling stuck. Give yourself the gift of going and getting the help that you need. I always go to, you won't get past this. You can get through this. You don't have to remain stuck. And I'm telling you, there's lifelines for you. I'm also going to put, we did a series of webinars on should I stay or should I go? And sometimes just journaling about, where you're at with that. But if you are not getting, so you say he's getting help and he's doing the work. I don't hear what you're doing for you. And I'm glad you're here. Don't get me wrong, but have you been through the betrayed partner work group? How many of our drop-in groups are going? Are you seeing a trauma therapist? This sounds like, some somatic body work, somatic therapy or EMDR, something to help you with that. Because I can appreciate the rage, but getting some help with processing through it. It won't magically go away, but it will lessen it, so that you can see it, but it won't be that immediate rage. I will. This is just a personal thing. I had a rage thing going for too long, and I finally went to my therapist, and EMDR worked for me. I'm just saying it worked for me, but rage is really, for me, hurt. But I like the external. I like the big feelings and pushing it away, because I really hate feeling hurt.
Right.
Like I can feel it. I'm just thinking about it. I feel it in my gut. I feel it in my chest. I don't like feeling that. And so the rage was a really powerful emotion and pushed it all away. So um, you identify that you are the problem now. And I bet there's plenty of stuff around both of you, but you have an opportunity to choose, that I'm not going to stay stuck in this, that you don't, even if you divorce right now, I promise you that rage will follow you unless you take the necessary measures to get the help that you need to process through it. There's grief in all of this. And I bet you haven't even tapped into, the grief of the loss of the marriage you thought you had, the grief of the husband you thought you had, all of that. And so giving yourself some grace and space, but please give yourself the gift of getting the help that you need. I will put one more resource about, there was a webinar series, and I'm planning another set. I've got some more ideas on that, but the should I stay or go, the first one with Kristen Snowden, lots of people have found that helpful, just to journal those 10 questions, and you may go, yeah, I know this is not for me, I'm done. But you may go, gosh, yeah, I still remember the guy that I really loved and I like, and there's still a lot of good. We've got a lot of history that was good. I don't know what's right for you, but there's help for you. And if you don't have a qualified professional for you, TAMI at seekingintegrity.com, and let me know where you're located, and I'll do my best to help you find a pro-dependent aligned professional for help for you. So anything to add there, please?
Yeah, I mean, I really value the honesty, and I'll get through this in a minute, of saying I am now the issue in the marriage. Because I do believe, and I really appreciate your honesty, because yes, when we are at 3 months or 5 months or 7 months or a year and a half, that degree of rage, and it's understandable. Hopefully it begins to dissipate over time. But the problem is, and I'm going to move on from this so that you don't feel responsible for the problems that are going on with you. But the truth is, if we are really working hard as addicts, and we are being open, and we are doing our best, and we are going to meetings and reaching out and being intimate and being honest, if we're becoming the person you always wanted us to be, then at a certain time your rage becomes counterproductive. Because what it does is, no matter what I do, no matter how hard I work, I'm never going to be, I'm never, forget my works to be appreciated, but there'll never be trust, no matter how hard. And so in some ways, I think I have seen addicts, not often, but begin to say, why am I even doing this? I have to be doing it for me, which is good, because it's not helping my relationship any. And I do think that sobriety, I cannot be sober because of you, for sure. At some point, it has to turn to me. But it's not like I don't want my relationship to be better or I don't care about you. There's a whole bunch of other things. Again, Dr. Schwartz and I, we come from such different worlds around sexuality in many ways. But we talked about this very issue about trauma, betrayal. And Tammy, I hear the same thing over and over again, is when the change happens, is when I stop looking at you and saying, you are the cause of my misery. And I come to believe after a certain period of time that I am now the cause of my own misery. I ruminate about it. I'm still looking through things. I'm still, whatever that is. And you you cannot heal the relationship unless you sit back and you say to yourself, I'm not going to grow unless I focus on me. And I want to be very clear. That isn't saying this happened because of me. That isn't saying I'm at fault for this happening. It's just saying that at a certain point in this process, when that healing is really going forward, I have to say to myself, what am I doing to heal the problem that I am creating for myself? Yes, you hurt me. Yes, I feel violated, all of those things. And no, I don't trust you. But how do I heal myself? Because that is, and Tammy talked about the women's retreats, which by the way, I'm not allowed. I said, can I at
You're
least be
not a
piped
woman.
in for a little
No.
live? No, 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 I'm not allowed because they don't. And and I said this morning, Dr. Schwartz, maybe the most important thing about the women's retreat, in my opinion, and you guys are going to hate this, is from the moment it starts, everyone there makes an agreement that they're not going to talk about their partner, that their sole focus in being there is their own healing, and that you trust yourself. And I understand in the beginning, everyone, and understandably, points at that partner, and you did this to me, and you did that to me. And you have been victimized. There's no question about it. And living with that kind of insanity at a certain point is not living your own life. And I'll say something to those of you whose addicts are not healing, whose addicts are not being open, I cannot drag someone into getting help. I can yell, I can nag, I can scream, I can threaten things, but ultimately, the only thing I can be responsible for is me. It really, really is. And so how do I take care of me if someone has victimized me? What is it that I do to take care of me? And I want to make a lot of trite references, and I will. Do you mind if I make a little trite reference? Because,
Make a trade reference.
okay, thank you. So, I had some damage to my car recently, and someone came and hit my car and they drove away. Well, you know, I was enraged, I was furious, and I was upset, and all those things. But the truth is, they were gone. No matter how angry I was, no matter how I never got their insurance, and how could they do this, and they were gone. So beyond I can't believe this happened to me, to something, I had to decide, how am I going to heal this? Not just the car, but how am I going to come to peace with this? Because I can't get a hold of that person. I can't shake them and make it different. And I just use that as example because in some ways, I want to find that person and I want to change them and I want to hold them accountable. But I may never be able to do that. What I can do is find peace with myself. Again, I am so impressed with you. I mean it, that you are sitting there and not saying, well, I'm entitled to this rage or I deserve this rage, but you're not happy with you. And I think we can't say that over and over again. It's not enough that someone made you miserable. Now you're making you miserable. And that is something you can do something about.
And I'm so glad. And it was a trite reference only, but
It was about cars.
but it was really, no, yeah. But here's to carry that out a little bit more. You could, go, somebody's got a Ring doorbell and I could find this and I'm going to get this plate. You could spend endless hours trying to track this down and all it would do is dysregulate you. And to your point too, Dr. Eddie Caparucci shared on one of his webinars, Dr. Gabor Mate's, there's a double reference there, that you can't make whatever happened unhappened.
Right.
So like none of us can make whatever happened unhappen. We just can't, no matter how bad, egregious the behaviors were, it happened. But Dr. Gabor Mate talks about, but what we do with that on a daily basis is what the trauma is, how we, either move forward or don't, and I
Right.
think that like, that is not that's should be empowering. It's like, I can choose, I can't make that not go, or I can't make that magically go away, but I can choose how I'm going to move forward. And I hope that gives you hope and an empowerment that, you know, I'm gonna choose. It's not gonna be easy, but you don't have to do it alone. We've got lots of references and resources. I put a whole bunch of things in the chat, you know, but our goal is to help people move forward, not just get stuck in, you know, this pain. I mean, that's a horrible place to be.
And I do want to say that one of the things we do in residential treatment, which I am very proud of, is spouses are deeply involved. They're writing, they're engaging, they have their own therapist. I also see one of the challenges in treatment is I'm the addict's therapist, and then I'm also responding to the spouse. And for the addicts, it brings up fear, like, well, if you're talking to my spouse, what are you telling them? And for the spouses, they want to say, well, are they doing this and are they doing that? And so and I don't think that a whole lot of people have done this, but we have really dedicated the time and the energy and the focus and the financial cost to make sure that you spouses have the help you need, and that you're not being blamed or shamed, but you're looking at, how do I manage my pain? How do I manage my pain? And what I was going to write, the other piece that might happen, carrying my car metaphor forward, is I shouldn't have parked here. I should have parked somewhere else. I should have made sure that meter, I was 5 inches to okay, you'll do it differently next time, or you won't do it differently, but you're not going to haunt yourself. You'll make a better decision next time. Maybe you'll park on a different street, but you will not, but it's not healthy to consistently say, well, I don't, anyway, I can't carry that metaphor further anymore. But I think you get the point, is that it happened to you. You've been victimized. You didn't really do anything to cause it, but the dent is still there, as Tammy said. So where are we going?
Okay, next one, the last one in the
I
answer.
love this question.
Question about the emotional abuse instituted boundary out of house separation. He attempted suicide. Child found him and was discharged back home after, in my opinion, crappy medical and psychic care. Now caring for him medically, as there is no other family or friends available to help. We have therapists that stated I need to take care of him because he gets terrified when I institute boundaries for separation. I obviously need more than betrayal trauma therapist and his CSAT. His sponsor stated this was too much for her and dropped me today. Just wondering what you would recommend. Thanks in advance.
Let me just say something at the last part. You know what? Maybe this person who was your sponsor, maybe they were overwhelmed. Maybe they couldn't handle. Maybe they have a child who they have to give more attention. I don't think, no matter what the sponsor says, or that we can necessarily read into their decision making, oh, there's something wrong with me and I was too overwhelming, and all of that, because you don't know what's going on with the other person. We say in sickness and in health, and I do believe that that is true. But for me, to some degree, that's qualified by, is this person that I care about wanting their own health? Because sickness and health doesn't mean that you do nothing for you and I do everything for you. And that's not what it means. Sickness and health means that we are going to walk this together, and we are both moving toward healing. I will say this to you also, and I'm not going to be responsible for how this plays out because I don't know you, but a lot of men come to treatment, and what they come to realize is my threats of suicide were manipulation. I've never hurt myself. But you know what? It did exactly this, which it took the focus off of me and me being blamed and it put the focus on you to rescue me and take care of me. By the way, there are other people who can take care of him if he feels suicidal. It's not necessarily something that you have to take care of. What else did it say?
But she's feeling trapped because, so this person
Go ahead.
attempted suicide and the child found, and then he was medically released back to her, and there's no family or friends. So this is the worst case scenario in this. It isn't somebody just going like, well, I'm going to manipulate the situation. Yeah, they actually did.
A step toward it.
Yeah.
Well, let me say something about that as a professional.
Please.
It is not okay to just drop somebody off on their doorstep, period. There are aftercare groups. There are things people do in the evenings. And even in this environment, there are suicide support groups. So the idea of saying, well, we've given you your medication and we hope you do better and bye-bye. I agree with you. I don't think that is the team taking responsibility for the person. It's like, okay, you paid your insurance and we're done with you. One of the things, I'm going to stop going back to our program, is we spend weeks working on what your plan is going to be when you leave. You're going to do this on Mondays. You're going to do this on Tuesdays. We work with you, and I think any good program does, to help you decide with us what steps you're going to take to make sure this doesn't happen again. We don't say, oh, well, good luck to you. See you later. Now you learned a few things. And so, yes, I agree with you about it's not good treatment for everyone to have a plan and how to carry it out. Um, Tammy, can you speak to we have therapy, because you're in a trap. I agree with that, what Tammy said. We have therapists that state that I need to, quote, take care of him because he gets terrified when I institute boundaries for separation, unquote. So what you're saying is you're in a complete nightmare, which is if you move away and take care of yourself, there's this threat of, oh, they're going to kill themselves. And so you have to, and you're being asked to take care of them when you have all of your other stuff going on. So I'd love you to, Tammy, this is a tough one, and I would love your feedback about, and this is beyond a CSAT, by the way, in my
Oh
opinion.
yeah, this is, and honestly, this feels like there are residential programs,
Right.
like Meningers. There's a number of them, and again, email me tami@seekingintegrity.com. But I think highly of Meningers. So that one comes to mind. But like McLean, there's some out on the West Coast, and there are programs where somebody who is this much of a threat to themselves, it probably needs, more. And there's that immediate crisis of the suicide, but then there's the longer term, kind of like residential care for mental health, versus residential care for, addiction. And so, but yeah, this is not sustainable. I mean, you can't
You can't do this
keep
alone.
doing this. Yeah. And his CSAT, and I'm assuming you heard this from the CSAT directly, so I'm going to take this at face value of like, well, you need to, focus on him. Healthy boundaries are for everyone's safety, and if you're the only person, like we always say, put your oxygen mask on first. Well, you can't even reach for it at this point because everybody else is demanding everything. It's not sustainable. So, and this is going to sound really horrible, and I'm going to say it anyway. But at some point, he's going to make a choice either to get help or not. And how are you going to take care of yourself? And regardless of what he does or doesn't do, and that's a really tough one. But you have children. Your child found him. Like this is so traumatic for you and your child. And so if you focus on what do you guys need to do, is there a path that could be helpful for you?
And I want to add that Tammy and I don't just make recommendations for sex addiction. We know good psychiatrists, we know good trauma therapists, and there's a lot of trauma in here. And if we don't know, we can find out. So I would suggest that you, TAMI at seekingintegrity.com, that you reach out and just say, I need someone to help. The other thing I wanted to say about this is, I wrote this down, is that I don't think you're responsible for him. I think you're responsible for helping, making sure he has help. Making sure that the setting is right, that he's seeing someone in the evenings, or he's going to serve. It is important. Now, I do think it's important, and I said this to someone today, that sometimes you have to put your anger down. Sometimes someone is so ill that you just have to put that aside and say, look, for a period of time, I need to attend to making sure they're safe. I get that. But over the long term, it's not sustainable. And by the way, if he does kill himself and it's completely on your shoulders, how will you ever live with that again?
And that's what it's like. You've got to get, like regardless of what he does or doesn't do. So,
Tammy, if you wouldn't mind putting in the chat, there are a couple of groups. There's one called Emotional Health Anonymous, EHA, which is about living with people who finding ways to find peace for yourself in this process. But also, there is it is AMI. The American, now Tammy, you know what it is.
NAMI, isn't it?
AMI,
National?
the National Association for the Mentally Ill, NAMI.
Yeah.
And it is, so my mother is mentally ill. I mean, she was profoundly mentally ill.
Yeah.
And I didn't know what to do when she showed up at my house crazy. And if she'd show up at 4 a.m, dripping wet with no purse, and she lived in another state, what am I supposed to do? I didn't know. NAMI is a place, NAMI, for people to go who have a mentally ill or suicidal parent or husband or child, that again, you need to be with your own people, and to
Mhm.
be with people who are also asking these questions. I really encourage you to take some responsibility for reaching out to others in other situations, because this is way
Yeah.
beyond sex addiction.
Yeah,
You know,
that's a great suggestion. I mean, I had forgotten about them, so I'm glad you remembered them. So
well, that's why we're a good team,
teamwork,
Tammy.
right? Yeah. Okay, so here's a question for you. Why do so many CSATs coddle the addict?
Uh, 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 so I want to ask a question about a question before we get to that one, because there was a really good question about, let me see, about trauma. I guess that's coming to the next question. Okay. So first of all, Tammy would say, and I agree, we don't know what they're doing. If you're not in the, I can say, my therapist can say, live or die, this or that. You got to show up for this, you got to show up for that. And I can go home to you and say, oh, well, they just encouraged me to sleep more. How do you know? So I do want to say that I don't know if it's surprising that addicts lie. We lie to therapists too. I've had therapists. These were people who should come to our consultation group, because we work with therapists to support them in their healing. I donate time for them every week. But I'm always amused when a therapist says something like, and forgive me for being amused, I've been working with that addict for 2 years, and I found out they were lying to me. And so we lie. And by the way, coddling may also be because I'm lying to the therapist, not just lying for you. So we don't really know what's going on. I will say that and Tammy and I are going to I'm going to do a series of trainings for therapists this year. And if you know a therapist who, by the way, might want more training in these areas, especially this question, there's no charge, and they get credits for this. But one of the main issues that comes up is, what kind of stance, from what place do I come from as a therapist? If you're someone whose mother's died and you're in grief and you're depressed and you don't know how to move on with your life, what kind of therapist? Because we say in therapy, follow the client. So I am following you in your grief, in your pain. I'm not going to confront. I'm not going to challenge. And you know what? My best skill set for this therapist is to be nurturing, is to be compassionate. I just don't, it's not in me to be confrontive or challenging. Well, it's not in some people to be surgeons either. That may not be the right. So part of it may be that you could learn all you want about the books to be read, the techniques, and Tammy and I know this a lot because we've seen people train. They can learn everything about this topic, just be absolute geniuses, but they don't know how to hold themselves with the addict. And therefore, because addiction treatment is not traditional psychotherapy, it is confronting, challenging, containing, holding someone accountable with compassion and kindness. But if I can't say to somebody who's a client, I think that you're full of, and look, it's destroying. If I can't say that, if I'm a therapist as well, I'm really sorry that's going on in your marriage, and then I'm not the right therapist for you. And so I don't know, I covered a range of issues. Tammy, is there anything that you wanted to add to
Well,
that?
and I was thinking, it's about accountability and willingness to change. I hear often from partners, oh, well, he's trying, he's seeing his CSAT, and I'm like, to me that is like a massive red flag. If he's just seeing his CSAT and he's trying, that CSAT is probably not holding him accountable. Now, just going to a CSAT, even Dr. Rob, when he was doing individual therapy, isn't going to be enough. The person has to do the work in between sessions and get the other help. This is a 24/7
I
issue,
wouldn't
so
keep
you have
seeing
to.
them
Yeah,
if they
well,
didn't do their own work.
correct. Yeah, and so,
Mm.
so so it depends. It also speaks to, there are therapists we recommend and there are therapists we don't, and even because they have the letters behind their names, there's a bunch of people that that there's a lot of great ones. So that's the good news. And then there are some that that are less likely to have the success necessary with the clients, because they'll just talk about what happened this week, and
Or
they're,
trauma.
yeah, or trauma. Oh gosh, yeah, yeah.
Oh, I wanted to add
Please,
something. We can
please.
mislead therapists, and that's going to come
Oh,
in the next
please.
question.
Okay.
But well, I know you want to talk about this, but I do want to say something about grief, which is real about this kind of therapy. And I want to take time, Tammy, if you don't mind, to run
Yeah.
a little bit over.
We're going
So,
to run over because we started late. So
so
hang in there, everybody.
when I am a therapist who's working with someone who is grief and loss, and I'm not talking about addiction, whatever, someone or something really important to them has gone away and they're dealing with grief. And they come into my office and I say, you know what? I think you should read this book about grief. I think it would really be helpful to you. I think you'll understand. And the next week they come in and they didn't read it. I'm going to say something as a traditional therapist, like, I can imagine that was really hard for you. And maybe we're not ready to read books. Maybe we just need to sit together. But if you're an addict and you come in and say, I need help for my addiction, and I say, read this book, and the next week you come in and you didn't read it, it's going to be a whole different set of circumstances, because I'm going to say, wait, you have this problem and you asked me for help, and now you're not doing the simple things that I ask you to do. And then I might say something like, I know how your spouse feels. I've made you make all kinds of promises and say you're going to follow through, but you don't. And so my stance is much more here and now, much more accountable. Addicts are out of control. My job in some ways is to hold them in a space where they cannot hurt themselves where they're acting out, until they get to a place where they can be responsible for it themselves. And parents aren't always coddling. Parents can be very, very hopefully containing and structured, and no, you don't have that tantrum. And so, as we said, it is a completely different form of therapy. And that's what we're going to give that class about, is why are some therapists unsuccessful despite the education that they have. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to the next question because it directly relates.
Here we
I've been
go.
waiting all night to answer this question.
I'm the betrayed, married 26 years. My husband recently uncovered suppressed severe childhood sexual abuse by both his mother and father. He was going to SA groups, but he said he didn't agree with the philosophy of his addiction being a disease. Is there a particular order his issues should be dealt with? Do we need a CSAT, trauma therapist, couples therapist? He is still lying about everything, but swears he is no longer has his sex addiction desires. He says God healed him.
Well, I don't know what to say about that part. I think God heals those who help themselves. That God offers us the
like
tools.
God uses other people. Yeah, I haven't gotten and yeah.
Well,
Anyway,
this is the thing
I'll
about,
stay quiet
you're
on that.
starving and you're in a closet and you're praying for food, but the food's in the refrigerator. You actually have
Yeah.
to leave the closet. But
Yeah.
anyway, that's a whole different story.
Yeah.
So one of the primary questions that the men want to know when they come into treatment is why? Why do I have this problem? Why have I acted this way? Why did my family do these things? And I understand, first of all, why is all about me? Let me just say that. Why isn't about the harm I've caused? Why isn't about my behavior? Why is more an introduction to I want to understand what's wrong with me. I was going to say something about that. And what I say to them, and I would really ask you to consider this, is I can show you if I had long enough, I can show you a film of everything that's ever happened in your life, every trauma, every issue. And that's what traditional psychotherapy does in an insight-oriented therapy, is I'm holding up a mirror and I'm saying to you, let's look at everything that happened to you. But with an addict, I can't stop that person, nor can they stop themselves from acting out, even if they see their whole history, because they need to learn how to stop. And this is part of the distraction, if I go into therapy and I learn trauma and all I talk about is trauma, it is in some ways a distraction, because look, I can learn all about my trauma and still get arrested. I can learn all about my trauma, but still give someone a disease. I think it is unprofessional for a therapist to sit with someone who's an alcoholic, and I've seen this, alcoholic or drug addict or sex addict, and say, well, once you work through your past, you're going to stop this behavior. That's not true. I'm always going to want to do this behavior. What I need to learn is how to manage it, how to do it without taking responsibility for taking responsibility. So pointing a finger at the past, I do think it is important, because where it moves me is, oh, I'm not a bad person. Bad things happen to me. And I think that self-hatred around how could I do these things to people I love, which addicts do, and I must be a bad, terrible, awful person or else I wouldn't do this. I'll say to them, I don't know how to work with terrible, bad people, but I do know how to work with broken people. So there is a reflection in the beginning about how I got here in order to reduce shame and make someone have some understanding other than self-hatred. But I'm not going to explore that, because the person is destroying their lives. I'm really on this one. So here's the thing. Working on trauma raises anxiety. I'm having to look at very painful, very difficult things that maybe I've never been able to look at, like this person uncovered. Well, addicts will act out if we drop a pencil. I can't tolerate, my car breaking down without going out and having sex with people. Why would you think I could ever be ready to look at trauma when I can't even live my day-to-day life without acting out? So two pieces. One is I need to learn the skills of how to live my life. And by the way, if a client comes in and they're acting out, but all they talk about is trauma, 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 at a certain point, it becomes a distraction. Now, do people need to work on these issues? Absolutely. By the way, not everyone has the time and the money. Most of you will never necessarily go to therapy. You don't have the resources, but you can begin to heal that process. But the acting out has to stop first, because every time I go into a therapist's office and I want to talk about trauma or I want to look at those issues, but I've just been acting out, guess what we're going to talk about? So I'm never going to get to the issues underneath because I'm constantly creating new drama now. um, I want to just give one last plug for treatment, which is there are some people who cannot stop their behavior because the amount of history and trauma is so overwhelming for them that they simply are unable to stop. That's someone who belongs in residential treatment, because what they're saying is, when I try to manage this, all these feelings come up and I just get overwhelmed and I get lost in that. And then when I start looking at this, I end up backing out or I'm using drugs or whatever. And what that person is saying is, I need to be contained. I need to be safe. I need to be able to talk about all of this and not go out and hurt myself or hurt somebody else. So there are people who, if they can't stop using because of their trauma, they need to be in a place where they can be safe and not use to look at the trauma. So I could tell you, I spent 20 years in psychotherapy. I built swimming pools for therapists. It's one of my favorite lines. But that came after I had the ability to self-reflect, to understand that my behavior was a problem, that it wasn't someone else's fault, that it was destroying my life, and that I had to come to terms with it and contain that and begin to take within myself my responsibility for my acting out. And when that became my reality, that I was safe within myself and in my actions, then I could look at trauma. Yeah. Anything else about that one, Tammy?
I do, and I'm going to be careful, but yeah. So I'm going to address the last part. So uh, every single day in my active addiction, I was just so out of control, and I couldn't stop. And I would pray, please, take this all away. And how my prayers were ultimately answered was, it didn't magically go away. I landed in treatment, and these people told me, if you do these things and you get support from others, it will, you don't have to continue on that. And so I still know I'm an addict. I'm an addict in recovery. It didn't magically go away. It's still there. And my brain still thinks differently. And to me, anybody who perceives that I'm magically cured, like it's just a matter of time. So I'm gonna switch and talk to you. What are you doing to take care of you? Because this person is just, like, it's the cliff is coming. So what are you doing to take care of you so that when that happens, you are okay? So if you haven't already done so, sign up for the boundaries work group that starts in April. That would be amazingly helpful for you.
That's for spouses.
Yeah, that is for betrayed partners. Yeah. So let's set aside what he needs to do, because he's gonna, he's not listening. He doesn't care. I'm making all of the excuses for all of that. So what are you doing to take care of you? That, like we talked about earlier, you can take care of you regardless of what he's doing or not doing. So,
And I'm going to say one last thing about that.
mm,
It doesn't matter whether I identify or like doing it doesn't matter. What does it say? He doesn't agree with philosophy of his addiction being a
yeah.
disease. I don't care. I don't care what his philosophy is. If I say to you, if you take this medication, you're going to get better, and you say, well, I don't want to take that. I don't believe in that. Well, I understand that you don't have to believe in it, but you may well stay very ill. And so we are asked to do a lot of things in life that we don't want to do. Just addicts aside, addicts don't want to take responsibility. We do want the easier and softer way out. And one of the easiest ways, and this happened before in this discussion, was to say, I don't belong there. I'm not like these people. I don't believe in this. Well, I'll tell you, without that, this person isn't going to heal. And so what are you going to do to come to peace with yourself? And by the way, I hope your spouses, we could not say it more often, Yes, you've been victimized. Yes, this person caused your pain. Yes, no, you were not responsible. No matter what you did, you made them miserable. You gained 300 pounds. You took I could leave you, but I don't have to go do this. I don't have to go act out with 100 people. But um, at a certain point, partners need to say, my pain is something that no matter what that other person does is not going to heal. And I have to come to peace with myself. I do want to ask all the spouses to write something down. And then, yeah, tell me we do need to stop. So all you spouses, I want you to take out a pen and a piece of paper, or if you're, a pad person, that's fine. But I ask you to please, and I'll give you a second, take your pen, take your paper, and I want every spouse to write this down, please. There is nothing that I have ever done. There is nothing I have ever done. There is nothing that I am doing now. So there's nothing I'm ever done. There's nothing I'm doing now. And there's nothing that I could ever do in the future to cause this person to do what they do. Nothing I did in the past, nothing what I'm doing in the present, and nothing I'll do in the future. It is not, I am not responsible for this other person's behavior. That is their choice. And I can't tell you how many alcoholics Tammy could who say, my boss, this and that, and today was a terrible day, and who wouldn't go have a drink? Well, I guess you can make that choice, but it's your choice, and you know where it's going to lead, and you know what it's going to do to you. So one of the main themes we're talking about is partners taking responsibility for the addict's problem. And I understand the deepest way you believe that if they could just heal, if we could just heal, that I will feel better. You have to heal, regardless of what they do. And someone said tonight, it's been 20 months. They're going to groups, they're working on healing, they're going to meetings. I think they're doing well. And I am so angry. At a certain point, your anger and your unhappiness is something you're going to have to look at regardless of what that other person does. And I know that's not the answer you want to hear. So Tammy, like I said, you're the most cheerful. I love working with you. I have to say, all these years,
Likewise.
I
Likewise.
really appreciate you. And I hope all of you do too. By the way, these are recorded, many of them, right? And this particular, what is the podcast called?
And I put the link in the chat: Sex, Love, and Addiction, and Overcoming
That's
Betrayal
mine.
and Trauma. There's two. But they're on there. There's a link on our website. And I also put the previously recorded webinars. We've got, I don't even know. I wouldn't be surprised if we've got 1,000 hours of webinars on our site, on the YouTube. All of it is on our website. Check them out. Free
It's all free.
resources. And so many of you are asking questions, and I'm frantically typing. But the boundaries work group, please, like boundaries are confusing. Please go get super queen of healthy boundaries, Debbie McRae's help figuring out what you need to do for you. So,
and I'll tell you what a boundary isn't.
yes.
If I do this, they will do that.
Right.
That is not a boundary.
It's not control. It's not punishment. Right. It's absolutely, if you do this and it's, I need this, if you are not able to hold that space, then I'm going to go do this, because guess who I have control over? Me. I don't have control over you.
Hey, Tammy, can I tell you something personal before we go? I've been looking over here and smiling, and that's because my dog, you ever seen a cat that kind of goes like they have a hairball?
Yeah.
Well, my dog is taking the stuffing out of the toy and then going,
yeah.
So I was like, boy, you're a cat. Anyway, I love my dog.
Bosley used to unpack all of the stuff. He's learned. He learned from another dog that that's not what we do. We chew nicely, but otherwise,
well, no one opens Christmas gifts better than my dog. I gotta say
I bet.
All right.
Say hi to Kimba for
Glad
me.
to help
Bye.
you folks.
Love you.
Please join us again.